Welcome to our community conversation, and our theme today is Innovating for Equity. I am Councilmember Rex Richardson. Thank you all for joining us here this evening, and we're going to have a very interesting conversation that will hopefully turn into a good dialogue and a good course of action for us as a community. We are here to talk about equity, talk about social justice, and ways that we can innovate to do better as a community and achieve those things. We know that violence is now considered a public health problem, so we've established a citywide violence prevention plan to address a broad safety agenda. We know that boys and men of color need a greater focus, so we created My Brother's Keeper and recently launched our local action plan. We know that we're the second most culturally diverse city, so we created a language access plan. We know these things, and we're taking steps in our city to address these things, but what do these things have in common? They all help to achieve equity. They all have a common denominator, but are we doing all that we can to make sure that we speak the same language? And are we doing everything we can to innovate to better achieve equity and to make sure that we connect all the dots?
We're talking about equity. There's a really large conversation right now going on at a national level around health equity. So everywhere that we stand, equity is the key focus of it. And so we start to think about what that really means. The things that really lead to health in our communities are your social conditions. Over half, 55% of health in a community is based on the social conditions in which you live. 30% are based on the behavior that you undertake. Only 10% is healthcare. When we're looking at this, we are looking at the entire area. We're looking at our air quality, we're looking at our crime rates, we're looking at our income. Everything matters when you're looking at health, which is why I'm looking at all of it. If I don't look at all of it, I can't move a community forward.
Regardless of how one might define equity, it is based on the context in which you live in, the life experiences that guide you, that inform your view of the world. And when we think about equality, while everyone is given the exact same starting point, there's the assumption that we all will reach the same ending point, but it doesn't take into account those differences that are inherent among us. There's a photo that has three individuals, varying heights, who are attempting to peer over a fence, looking over into a baseball field. One is tall, one is of medium height, one is short. And the tall individual can already see over the fence. The medium height person cannot, and the short person cannot at all. And so in the next frame, there is a photo with three boxes, just three boxes. The tall person is already, thank you, Vincent, the tall person is already able to see over. They're given a box, they can see even further over. The medium person is able to see over. The short person still cannot. It doesn't take into account the fundamental distinctions that people have.
Oakland is a lot like Long Beach, and so many of the issues that are confronting you here, we've also seen in Oakland. But I want to talk a little bit about the presentation that was made today, because I think that there's a critical component that needs to be said. You cannot have a conversation about equity without talking about race. When you look at all the data that was presented with respect to the health department, the social conditions are really euphemisms for race. When you look at all of the data, if I looked at your city and I look at the data, white population is doing pretty well, people of color are not. And so you have to have an intentional conversation about race in order to get to equity. There is an intersection in just about each and every one of the issues that were presented, and it is race. When you talk about equity, and we talk about it every day, when you talk about educational disparities, when you talk about health disparities, when you talk about the technology gap, and all of those gaps, those are euphemisms for talking about communities of color, and they've somehow made us believe that there is something deficient in us, and that if we only found the right program, that somehow we would change the outcomes, when in reality there is a systemic culture that has to be changed.
Privilege of leading for the city of Seattle what we call the Race and Social Justice Initiative. It's 12 years old. It was the first in the country. And its premise is that we are working to dismantle institutional and structural barriers in order to achieve racial equity within city government and across our communities in Seattle. You can imagine that 12 years ago, that was a mighty vision, and it still is today. Because despite all of our effort, despite all of our work, we are still struggling with racism and how it impacts every area of our life. And we heard about health disparities just a moment ago, but there's health disparities, there's criminal justice disparities, there's educational equity disparities. And what I have found in my 2.5 years of being in this position is that people love to talk about equity. People love to talk about how equity is within our grasp. But what people do not like to talk about is racism. And if we don't talk about racism, we will never achieve racial equity.